force plates, whether you already have them and you use them, or you're in the information collection stage of your force plate journey, figuring out if it is worth it for you, breaking down my experience with force plates, how to use them, tips, tricks, thought processes have a lot of value to you regardless of what bucket you fall in. And this 14-second intro is already way too long. We know why we're here, so let's get into it. So, as I already alluded to, there's two buckets that you can pretty much fall in this force plate discussion. You either do not have them and you are trying to figure out if it is for you or not. And there's value in this episode because I'm here to share information, knowledge, experience as to the value that force plates can provide to you. And if you already have force plates, I think it's valuable to hear an outside thought process, my processes and things like that, to first give you new ideas. But also when you combine a thought process from someone else and you combine your own anecdotal evidence, you have your own experiences and things like that, you can figure out the truth and slowly creating your own thought process and evaluation for technology, right? So I have a general force plate framework presentation podcast. You have your own experience, truth, and anecdotes. Put those together, and that gives you a better tech evaluation process for the future. So regardless of what bucket you fall in, this is the episode for you. And here's what I want for you. When this episode is done, however many minutes it may be, I want you to leave this podcast with ideas. Okay? If you currently have force plates, I need you will be super excited to go hop on them yourself and start experimenting. And if you do not have any, I know the first few things that hopefully you'll be typing into Google after this to start figuring out if it's worth it for you or not. So also, if you don't have force plates, I want you to know that your force plates will not collect dust. You will have plenty of ideas and things to do if you are to buy them when you first get them, to know that you will be getting your value out of them. If you do have force plates, you will know that it is worth the money, and there are things that you can start doing to feel like you are getting your money's worth out of your force plates. And also, in general, your force plates will make you better. And that is not to say, for context, that force plates are for everyone, or I'm here to say that 100% you should buy them and they'll change your programming, your coaching, and your athletes forever. That's just not true. But if you go through this process, you apply these ideas to yourself, you do your homework, and you realize and you figure out the force plates are for you, then 100% force plates will make you better. So for context, I've had force plates in two different capacities. Number one, a free trial, a 3-month trial in the private side, in a private facility. And I've had force plates for 1 year in the college side. And I actually have an episode number 115. This is episode 169 of when me, as a sports science guy, or as our sports science coordinator at my old facility, I said no to force plates. Or basically, when I was on this 3-month fact-finding mission, right? Doing my homework, reading, calling people, giving presentations to my coworkers, collecting data on our current athletes. And those 3 months ended, and I had to report and discuss with my boss about my thoughts. What's the truth? How does this apply to us? How does this not apply to us? And is it worth, let's just say it would have been $3,000, right? Is that $3,000, are we going to be getting as much value out of that $3,000 versus if we take that $3,000 and buy other things that are also on our list, can we get more out of it for our current situation? And we basically came to the conclusion that it was not worth it, right? We should spend that money in other ways to get more value out of our situation and provide more value to our athletes and our processes as coaches to our athletes. So if you're interested in that, me kind of arguing the flip side of all this, check out episode 115. And I've also really enjoyed this past year having force plates in the college side, working with relatively higher level athletes, working with insanely more consistency, right? Seeing athletes 3 to 4 days a week over however many months, 8, 9 months it was, that I think that there's a lot of value to be had. I'm excited to share. So what are force plates, right? I'll tell you what, force plates are not. They're not just two pieces of metal that you jump on and you put it on social media and then you show the fancy little graph and it gets you a bunch of likes. Well, I guess technically they do that. But force plates, and I'll start with the fancy technical phrasing and then I'll kind of break it down. A neuromuscular assessment of an athlete's lower body ability to accomplish a bilateral jumping task, right? So neuromuscular, because there is a time component, right? It's very athletic, it's smooth, it requires coordination, and your muscles execute the task. Well, it's neuromuscular. Of an athlete's lower body ability, we're just talking mainly in regards to a counter movement jump. So hands on hips, start tall, jump as high as you can, right? To accomplish a bilateral jumping task. So jumping as high as you can. And this basically just gives insights into an athlete's force producing strategy. And that's really what force plates do. They measure force over time, and you give athletes different tasks, or in this example, the task of a bilateral jump, a counter movement jump. And how do athletes produce force? Because we know that two athletes can jump the same height, but they can do it in two different ways, right? So instead of just what do they jump, how do they jump, right? So this has a lot of value in sports because those are often the two constraints that athletes are trying to work within, right? Accomplish a sport-specific task and do so with really high output and do so in the least amount of time. And we know that we can assess this in a relatively simple and repeatable task with the hands on hips, double leg jump, right? And we can assess down to the millisecond, right? 1,000 hertz is pretty much the standard these days for force plates. 1,000 times in 1 second, it's measuring the athlete's force. And we can assess the athlete's jump quantitatively. So this is probably what you're thinking about. And I have just a screenshot of the raw metrics, not even the raw data, just the raw metrics of things that are already calculated for me. But we have jump momentum, jump height, average relative braking force, peak relative braking force, average just absolute braking force, and stiffness, relative force at minimum displacement, just all these numbers. I think so. I was on Hawk and Dynamic force plates this past year, 79 metrics in one jump for all the athletes for every day of training, right? So 100%, there's enough data for you to dive in. And of the 79, do all of them have a bunch of value? Are all of them super applicable? Well, they're there for a reason, but I was able to boil it down to at least 10, and if not less, more like 5. But here's just an example of the quantitative numbers that it tells you. And next we have the force time curve. So I have two pictures of two just jumps on a force plate. And if you're listening in podcast form, you can probably envision what this is, where the line is flat, it dips down during the counter movement, and then they jump up and produce a lot of force, or they're producing force, so then leave the force plate, and basically just a force time curve of a counter movement jump. And this would be qualitatively, how do the athletes jump, right? How is the slope of line? What are the peaks at the bottom and the top of their jump and the force time curve and things like that. So I equate this pretty similarly to the 1080 sprint. So for those of you that have consumed my 1080 sprint content, if not, it's pretty good on my YouTube and my podcast as well, where you have the force, the time, the power, the velocity of a sprint on the 1080 sprint. Then you have the graph of every step that they take that you can compare and contrast to previous runs. You can say this run had a better first step because the slope, they created more speed quickly and things like that. So this is qualitatively, how do the athletes jump, is just the visual graph. So force plates are used through sports science initiatives, doing sports science. How do force plates support your sports science initiatives? And well, first we have to know what sports science is. And very simply put, sports science is applying the scientific method to sport. I also have other content on this, but basically it's just like in third grade when you had seeds of plants and you grew them in different conditions, right? You had one in the sun, one in the shade, one in water, one in soda, et cetera, and then you measured the growth of the plant over time, right? This is basic. Force plates are basically just a super in-depth way to measure the plant's growth, right? How wide is it? How tall is it? How many like little leaflets and stems and things like that are growing out of it at once versus simply just measuring the height of the plant. So in this question, collection, conclusion, right? Scientific method process, well, applying that to force plates, our question is, how do my athletes produce force? How much force are they producing? How does their force producing strategy and outputs compare to their teammates? How is it changing over time, right? Those are the questions that force plates try to offer. And then you have to collect it. Well, you can do that with a counter movement jump. You can do it with a squat jump. You can just do general force with an iso mid-thigh pull. You can do a drop jump off a box. You can do a rebound jump. And I'm not here to get into all the weeds and the details of all of those, but basically you can jump/measure with all of the tests that you can do on force plates. And then conclusion. What does this mean? How does this make me better? And how will I train the athletes differently according to that data, right? And that is science. You have your question, you collect data, you figure out what it means. So that is the scientific method applied to using force plates. So with all tech, and this was one of the rabbit holes that we dove down, not necessarily too long, but it definitely took a little bit longer than I would have first thought at TC Boost, working with mainly middle school and high school athletes, but mainly for this project, it was high school and college kids. Being able to use the 1080 sprint data a little bit more and a little bit better with the force velocity profiling and things like that. And we just came to the conclusion where our athletes just need to train more, right? And I hate leaning into, if athletes just show up, like they'll get better. And attendance is going to be the most important KPI for athletes. But it's true with certain populations, athletes with a low training age, right? And it's so interesting to have worked with, 10-year-olds all the way up to professional athletes and a lot of high school and kind of college age kids. There's kids that just need to show up and they get better. It's very linear because they are so raw and untrained at the start. And there's athletes at the college level, whether they're freshmen who already have a training age of 4+ years because training has come a super long way and they don't need general things. And there's upperclassmen that have been in and out of being injured and don't really do what they need to do on their own and things like that, where, they're 22, 23 years old and they do just need to train, right? So I think it's important to keep in mind that not all athletes need to just train. I would hope that eventually athletes out-train just good, well-rounded training, right? Where you can just lean into, just keep showing up and you'll get better. So I think with technology, you have to ask yourself, have your athletes out-earned well-rounded training? Or is the technology here to support that next level of training that there is? Basically, and this is an extreme example, but what is jumping on force plates with a 10-year-old going to tell you that you didn't already know otherwise? They're slow jumpers, they don't jump high, and they don't produce force, right? Well, I could save you $3,000 and tell you all that right now. But on the flip side, you're working with a super highly trained college kid, you're working with a professional athlete, even some pretty advanced high school athletes. Well, they produce a lot of force, they do it fast, and they have pretty high outputs. So now, can we get a little bit more specific? Can we get a little bit more dialed? Can we tweak the type of plyometric that they're doing to get them a little bit more benefit and a little bit more individualization, right? That is where higher level tech comes in with higher level athletes. And here's just an example, just my thoughts and reflecting over this past year, training, college athletes for a whole year, of just not everyone should be on the same program. And here's my decision-making tree to help me justify that, both quantitatively, but also having a reproducible process. So I'm not here to get into all of the weeds, but basically, once your athletes out-earn well-rounded training, And that could be just anecdotally as a coach. That could be they've hit certain numbers for lifting or things like that. That's when higher level tech complements higher level athletes to help guide that not just well-rounded training, not just stock average training that everyone gets processes. So with the data itself, I think it's important to keep in mind also that it's population specific. So even though there might be an article on professional rugby players, well, if you have force plates with college tennis players, right? Or let's say you do have them at a high school, well, those numbers aren't going to directly apply. Now, there's truth, but it's important to keep in mind that when you're in this force plate process, you have to figure out what is good, bad, high, low. What are you shooting for your own athletes? Now, it's really good places to start reading research, talking to people, comparing, contrasting different settings, but data is population specific. And with all of these things, well, what would you assume to be optimal or what would you assume to be suboptimal? And based on that guideline, what decisions do you do because of that, right? Or how do you tweak the program because of the numbers? So if I told you, and this is sports science, how everything's relative to the plan, right? If your athletes have, 5,000 total yards in a practice, well, that number in and of itself doesn't mean anything. Well, if the practice plan said you were supposed to be at 5,100, well, perfect, you were right there. But if the practice plan said that you're only supposed to be at 2,500, well, 5,000, you doubled what your practice plan said, right? So on the flip side, let's say an athlete produces, let's just keep square numbers, 1,000 newtons of force concentrically on their counter movement jump. Well, is that good or bad? I don't know. Well, maybe for high schoolers, it's supposed to be 75, and for college kids, it's supposed to be 100, and for pros, it's supposed to be 125. Well, perfect. They're right where they should be. Well, what if they're at 75, but they're supposed to be at 100? Well, then you know that they just need more force. So I think it's important to keep in mind that the numbers in and of itself, just jumping on the force plate in and of itself doesn't mean anything. You're supposed to create context with what's good, what's bad, what am I shooting for, where are they missing the mark, what are they deficient, what are they already good in, and consequently, what do I do or not do because of that? So I'm here just to break down a few examples of how I was planning on implementing these force plates in real life in year 2, knowing the athletes better, having my process a little bit more dialed in, and having just a year's worth of learning what's good, what's bad, what's high, what's low for my specific population on force plates. So I'll start on the right. This is just the easiest one. Well, first is an athlete just trying to increase body weight, right? Very general program. They'll just be in hypertrophy. But we know using force plates that we can use jump momentum as a key performance indicator, right? That we can get better without always jumping higher, especially if the goal is to put on weight and put on size, right? Well, if they jump the same or a little bit lower, but their body weight's going up, which is the goal, then technically they did get better. They had more jump momentum, right? So using force plates, even in a general sense, let's say it's in a team setting, well, they're going to be jumping anyways because the whole team jumps, but they have a general program, but you can still evaluate progress, right? Next in the middle here, how I would use force plates to bucket athletes into different plyometric categories. So just looking at the ratio of concentric to eccentric peak relative force. So compared to their body weight, are they more concentric biased when they jump, or are they more eccentrically biased when they jump? And this is a big assumption, right? What's optimal, what's suboptimal, is you would assume that you want the athletes to output the same amount concentrically to eccentrically to be balanced or even. So that number should be 1.0. And that's just a general assumption. And maybe over time, I realized that in general, athletes are more concentrically focused. And maybe it should be 1.1 instead of 1.0. But let's just go with the 1.0 assumption for now. So concentric divided by eccentric. So if they're above 1, they produce more concentric force. So I want to increase their eccentric force, or the denominator, to get that number closer to 1.0. So they would be in more of an eccentric focused plyometric category. Makes sense. More depth drops, depth landings, more heavy jumps, having to produce force to stop all of the extra weight and all the extra momentum, right? And on the flip side, if their ratio of concentric to eccentric is under 1, 0.9, then that means that they're more eccentrically biased. They produce more eccentric force compared to their concentric force. And that means that they should be on more quick, concentric focused, like a seated box jump where you sit on the box. So there's actually no eccentric portion. There's only concentric portion. Or accommodating resistance, right? Bands, for example. Bands get easier at the bottom and they get harder at the top. So athletes have to learn how to finish through concentrically against the band. And last, not to share all of my secrets, but there's no secrets. This is just my thoughts of, well, if an athlete is strong enough, right? Let's say that they can lift your standards for back squat, for reverse lunge, for RFS, whatever it is. Well, then can they create force fast? So that would be like relative force and minimum displacement. Well, if they're in the top half, so if they're strong enough, or if they're not strong enough, then just get stronger. But if they are strong enough and they can produce fast force, well, then they should be in the power bucket, right? If they're strong enough and they can't produce fast force, basically on the force plates, then they should do more fast force type exercises. So rapid eccentrics, more overcoming isometrics, being able to create force fast, right? So just a few examples of how I would use force plates to improve my processes, individualize a little bit more, and get my athletes more of what they need when they have out-earned just general well-rounded training. And this doesn't mean that freshmen in the college setting automatically go in the freshman bucket and upperclassmen automatically get all this stuff. They have to earn it, right? With hitting certain squat numbers, with not being in a general body weight bucket or goal and things like that. So actually using force plates, right? Because we have to, let's say we have really good questions and I have my decision-making tree and thought processes. Well, then you have to actually collect the data, right? So what is it actually like using force plates? And it's a bottleneck. It's one piece of technology that takes, let's say 10 seconds an athlete, right? They hop on, or you have to turn it on, you have to zero it, you have to connect the tablet to it. The athlete has to hop on, you have to select their name, you have to hit start. The force plate has to basically zero with them on it so they know what their body weight is and they know what the starting amount of force is. They have to jump and land and then hold it for a second or two so the algorithm knows that they're done jumping. I have to hit save and then they're done. And let's say, not that athletes ever mess up or have a lack of focus, right? Then you have to do it again. And let's say you're doing a little bit more detailed assessment where you're doing a counter movement jump and a squat jump in a day itself, right? Well, this process of 10 seconds just turned into 30 seconds per athlete, right? And that was one of the hardest things on the private side, was having to get athletes in and out so quick, and I only have an hour with them once or maybe twice a week, right? So knowing that it is one athlete at a time and it is a little bit time consuming running the tablet and doing things like that. Not that that's wrong, that just is what it is. It's not instantaneous. So yes, you do get the numbers right then and there. Okay. So you hit end jump, it spits out their jump height, it spits out all the numbers that you want and that you set. And I guess it gives a green arrow for more than one standard deviation above what they've been, a yellow arrow for above but not as much above kind of what they've been doing, and a down yellow and a down red. So I guess you can program in just the arrow color and direction and what the thresholds for those. But if you want it in a little bit more sophisticated of a model of having, comparing to what they've done this week, this month, the last 3 days, things like that, besides just general simple things, it's not going to be as instantaneous. Or if you have any metrics that you calculate on the back end, right? Like that ratio of concentric to eccentric force of that one specific number, then you have to calculate that after the fact. So you have to have a plan of what you're going to do with the numbers on the back end, because if you're just using force plates to tell the athletes how high they jumped and that's it, well, I could save you $3,000 and just buy a $500 jump mat, right? So you have to know what you're doing on the back end with the numbers. And this is also always worth putting out there, but this is assuming that you'll get good effort with your athletes. If athletes are jumping 2 jumps a day, 3 to 4 days a week, that's 6 to 8 jumps that you're assuming that they're going to give super high output and effort, versus if it's just 1 jump a day and maybe only once or twice a week, you're asking for a lot less of the athletes. And I know, crazy, sometimes athletes are a little bit not focused, or maybe not as into it, or maybe they might feel like guinea pigs, but there's also the art of coaching and the art of implementing force plates to be able to describe the value to the athletes, being able to describe their responsibility in the process of, I need you focused, I need you to jump as high as you can, super high effort every single time, or else we're wasting all of our times, right? So it's worth putting out there that you need good jumps every single time. So at the end here, so my closing thoughts and my thought process for force plates and just evaluating technology in general. So using it, what's it like on a daily basis, boots on the ground, session in, session out, using technology. And it's very specific. It's one athlete at a time, and it's kind of time consuming. But the question that you can ask yourself is, does it allow you the ability to still train? The only way that you can get better is by training, not by collecting numbers. And there is a little bit of truth of testing is training and training is testing, but 1 or 2 jumps with hands on their hips, you can probably get a little bit more effective stimulus and a little bit more effective of a workout besides just that within an entire training session, right? So depending on the quantity of athletes you have, and depending on how much time you have to train, assuming that you do it within the session itself, well, does it still allow you to train, right? Are you going to have the athletes run it themselves? Just put up the tablet on a tripod and teach them how to select their name and hit start, and their buddy can say go for them? Or is it going to be run by you, the coach? Do you have 2 coaches with you? Are you going to ask athletes to come in before the training session to get the jump in? And that way it's not in the session itself. So is it a piece of technology and how you want to implement it in your training that allows you simply just the ability to still train effectively and efficiently? Data. It's high level. It's super in depth. There's so many things that you can do with it that it can be paralysis by analysis. So I think simpler is better, at least at the beginning, but you still have to do something. And like I said, it has to be more than just jump height. So have your athletes earned it? Have your athletes earned super high level data? Have they earned you on the back end, diving in, calling people, reading research studies, all of these things to use that high level data in high level ways? Because in the private side, with most of our athletes being 12 to 18 years old, they just have to train. They haven't earned that yet. Not that they can't, and not that we didn't have clients that earned it, like our NFL Combine guys and some of our college kids. Just the majority of our clientele didn't in the private side. And the last question to ask is, what intervention are you going to do? / how does this fit into your system, how you're currently training? And what can force plates do for you that you couldn't do otherwise, right? And the interventions that there are for force plates, the world is your oyster, right? There's 79 different metrics in one jump itself. And that's not including qualitatively the curve and how the athlete's jumping, right? So is how you train conducive to the insights that force plates can give you? What do you want to know that you can't get with a cheaper technology, that you can't get with a more time-efficient technology? And basically, does the questions that you're asking yourself, what do my athletes need? What can I do better in my training? How better can I program for them? Do force plates answer that for you? So, closing thoughts, thought process. I have another slide, don't worry. What is it like using it on a daily basis, and can you still train? What data does it give you? And have your athletes earned needing that data, or have they earned more than just basic level data, because force plates are high level data? And last, intervention. Does it fit into your system? Does it align with what you believe in? And what can you not do that you want to do that you can only do with force plates? So action items. I'm a very action-oriented person, and I have 2 things for individuals that don't have force plates, and I have 2 things for individuals that do have force plates, kind of moving forwards. So if you do not have force plates, ask for a trial. If you don't ask, the answer is always no. I've talked with many people of many tech companies, whether it's for jump mats or force plates or 1080 sprints or timing lasers. Everyone's super nice. And I always say, with really good technology, if they gave everyone a 6-month trial, they would sell every single unit of it, right? Like, I'm a big fan of the 1080 sprint. I think if everyone had a 6-month trial, they would sell every single one, right? And if force plates fit for you, they make sense, they answer your questions that you have, and you spent 3 months with them, well, I would hope that they would almost sell themselves. So if you don't ask, the answer is always no. And it's as simple as DMing someone at a company and saying, hey, I'd love to hop on the phone. I'm interested in getting force plates. You explain a little bit more about your background. Maybe they can connect you with an individual in your same setting who's using force plates at a super high level, right? There's so many things you can do, but talk to people at companies, listen to podcasts like this, I guess, and ask for a trial, because if you don't ask, the answer is always no. And second, if you don't have a force plate currently, is write out your thought process and ideas. So it's one thing to cut the check for, let's say, $3,000, going with that number again. It's one thing to cut the check for $3,000 and saying, I'll figure it out when I get them, right? I know that there's a lot of cool things that you can do. Versus if you know about the depth of the data, if you know the different types of tests that you can do, if you know that you're gonna upcharge your athlete assessment by an extra $50, and that you know that, oh yeah, I could for sure make my money back within a year just by doing X amount of assessments, right? Or I know that with our NFL Combine guys, I know I need buckets for this, this, and this, and I know exactly what tests I'm going to use on the force plates and what numbers I'm going to use for those buckets, right? How easy is it for you to cut that check, or to justify to your superior, supervisor, boss, whatever, to cut the check when you have all of that already mapped out ahead of time, right? Because that's the concern that we all have with technology, is you're going to cut the check, it's going to be used at the beginning, and then it'll collect dust, and then you feel dumb and you just wasted some money. So write out your thought processes, your ideas, your questions, and then read, listen, and see if you can already make a plan before you have force plates, so you can hit the ground literally running and start maximizing the value that force plates can give you. And if you currently do have a force plate, on yourself, the next time you're training, the next time you're in the facility, mess with the eccentric utilization ratio, right? So counter movement jump divided by squat jump, and those numbers. The dynamic strength index, counter movement jump peak force divided by iso mid-thigh-pull peak force. And just with that, for example, it's one thing to understand what an iso mid-thigh-pull is, and it's something else to feel what that feels like. To know, oh man, I can't do that just with my grip. I need straps for that. Oh, well, if an athlete doesn't have straps, then I have to teach them how to use straps. I have to do it for them, right? And you know how long it takes to set up a bar in a rack versus if you have an iso mid-thigh-pull rack already. So there's just so much that you can learn by doing it yourself and feeling it yourself, right? I think feel is so huge. And you know how it feels, what it should feel like, what it shouldn't, and you know how to coach it better. So if you're doing a drop jump, do a 6-inch box, a 12, an 18. Feel what height feels too high, right? Feel what height feels too easy. So even if you don't know what jump height you want to use, well, you know what feels good, what feels challenging, but isn't too challenging, and then you can just start there with your athletes and then go from there, right? Or a rebound jump. You're supposed to rebound under 250 milliseconds. Well, how quick is that? What does that look like? What does that feel like? So you know how to coach that better for your athletes. And with that as well, if you have force plates, is just start seeing what your data looks like, right? If you get the ballpark or the number of, let's say, for your dynamic strength index, it's supposed to be 0.6, 0.7, right? And you know that you've always been stronger as an athlete, not very bouncy. Well, you would assume that your DSI is probably going to be on the lower end of that, right? If your iso mid-thigh pull is going to be better than your kind of movement jump. So basically just use your intuition to kind of get the ball rolling for all of these things when you're trying to get to that next level of your force plates and your force plate knowledge and usage. So there's my force plate breakdown, thought process for people who are interested, what they can do starting today to start learning more. And for those who currently have force plates that can start extracting more value out of their force plates. So hopefully that helps. Send me a message on Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, anything like that, at Coach Big Toe, Coach Bigtoe. Let me know how it goes if you have any questions, and thanks for listening.